Greece is a mountainous country. The average terrain altitude is twice that of Germany. Greek mountains are characterized by steep cliffs. It has some 6,000 islands in the Aegean Sea, and the combined total coastline numbers 11th longest in the world. This means that Greece has a coastline longer than the United Kingdom and Italy. Many of these coastlines, especially on the mainland, are also very mountainous, with steep cliffs rising out of the sea. The country also has a very mountainous barrier in the north, and it more or less isolates Greece from the Balkans. The only real trading route for the Greeks is the Mediterranean Sea. Now, this rough terrain makes for excellent defensible advantage, but it also makes development and welfare very costly and very difficult. To understand the modern geopolitics of Greece, you have to take a look at the history and topography of the country. The rugged terrain provides Greece with a real advantage in terms of defensive war, and this was the military strategy of the ancient Greeks. A good example is when 300 Spartans and another 1,000 or so Greeks clashed with a Persian army numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The geography of Greece makes it a tough country to conquer and occupy. Even the Ottomans had a difficult time controlling Greece. Sure, the Ottomans controlled the Greek cities, but they didn't control over the mountainous interior. Those were controlled by Greek brigands, known as plebs. They blocked mountain passes and frequently made raids on the Ottoman regiments. This just goes to show you how difficult it is to actually occupy and control Greece. And this isn't something exclusive to an external power, but the Greeks themselves had an equal difficult time controlling their own lands. That's why in ancient times there were so many independent Greek city-states, and they frequently waged wars against each other. The geography of Greece allowed for the existence of these city-states and prevented a unified Greece. Modern Greece is unified as a nation and culture, but still the government is more like a confederation than a republic. Its rugged topography makes a centralized government very difficult. Everything from milk delivery to taxing is a challenge. This may sound weird for most people, but in Greece tax evasion is described as a national sport by Greek politicians. On the average, about 40 billion in US dollars goes uncollected every year, and this obviously contributed to the Greek deficit problem. But this also shows how mountainous Greece is and how difficult it is for the government to exercise its authority over the country. Another issue for Greece is the agriculture. With about 80% of the country covered in mountains, there is very little room for fertile plains. The only exception to this is Greek Macedonia. The lack of arable land combined with the difficult land-based transportation routes has made Greece a capital-poor country. The cities make just enough capital to cover their own expenses. So from the regional perspective, there is no reason to supply the central government with what little they make. What some of these regions did was invest the capital into developing expensive, independent maritime regions. So you can imagine that this inefficient distribution of capital put a real constraint on the already capital-poor Greece. It creates a very decentralizing situation where all of Greece suffers from lack of coordination, and it's very similar to the ancient confederation of Greek city-states. Another thing is the uneven distribution of wealth in the Greek society. Mountainous countries have a more expensive infrastructure. It is simply cheaper to build a road in a flat country than a mountainous country. Therefore, those who have the money to build and control vital infrastructure build up a monopoly. And there are a lot of monopolies in Greece. Usually when you have this kind of uneven distribution of wealth, a society will develop a strong split between left and right political movements. That is the case for most countries in Latin America, and that is also exactly the case in Greek society. There are very strong left and right political parties who simply don't want to compromise. For example, the economy has a lot of monopolies, but the state also has a very generous social welfare system. In practicality, Greece really cannot afford any of these. Right after World War II, this divide between left and right parties led to a brutal civil war in Greece, and after this came a military coup by right-wing military leaders. In short, the right-wing and left-wing movements cannot be underestimated. Violent confrontations have happened before and can happen again. The geopolitics of Greece resembles more like an island than a mainland. Greece has no real land-based transportation routes to the mainland of Europe. The only two links are the Achios and Strimonas rivers. The Achios river is not a navigable river, but you can travel by valley roads. The Strimonas river isn't an ideal transportation route either, but more importantly, this river forces the Greeks to be dependent on their northern Balkan neighbors, which the Greeks consider unacceptable for historical reasons. So the only viable route is by sea, and when you have a country dependent on sea trade, you're going to need a good navy and an air force. Greece has both of these. In fact, Greek pilots are among the best trained and most experienced in Europe, but building and maintaining a navy and a good air force is one of the most costly endeavors for a government. In fact, Greek military expenses are twice as high as the average European military expenses. Now you may ask yourself, why wasn't this an issue before? Well, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, Greece was a strategic ally of the United States in their effort to contain the Soviet Union. And Washington covered for most of the military expenses of Athens. And even before the Cold War, the major sponsor of the Greek military was the British Empire. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, Greece lost its strategic importance and thereby lost its financial aid. When a country suddenly loses its strategic importance, it's often difficult for the leadership to accept the new geopolitical realities. That is what happened in Greece. The leadership did not adjust to the new situation. Instead, they kept on spending tremendous amounts of money into their defense budget. And this too contributed to the Greek budget deficit. But on the other side, the country really has little choice in this matter, because the core of Greece is not Athens or Thessaly, it's the Aegean Sea, which allows Greece to be connected for trade, defense and communication. Without the Aegean Sea, there is no Greece. So the country needs to upkeep a modern navy and an air force to control the core of Greece. Now the Aegean Sea and its islands are an interesting subject. The sea has thousands of islands, but you basically need to control only two, Rhodos and Crete. Anything beyond this scope is of secondary importance. The only exception to this is the island of Corfu. This island gives Athens a strategic advantage and an anchor in the Otranto Strait and the Adriatic Sea. Another important island is Cyprus. Whoever controls Cyprus has a way to project power into the Levant and southern Anatolia. One more strategic island for Greece is Sicily. Historically, this island was colonized by the Greeks, but they didn't have the unified government to hold on to it. With Crete, Rhodos, Cyprus and Sicily under control, the Greeks controlled the entire eastern portion of the Mediterranean Sea. The ancient Greek period was the last time the Greeks had any kind of political independence. From then on, the Greeks have always been dependent on various external players. Modern Greece does not control Sicily, and its attempts to annex Cyprus nearly led to a military confrontation with neighboring Turkey. So in conclusion, you've got this very mountainous country that functions like an island, and despite being capital poor, the country has a near Western standard of living. Sure, the nation is unified in terms of culture, but it's divided in terms of regional interest, economics and politics. This lack of coordination has led to a decentralized government. This is a country with almost a quarter of its economy in the shadow sector. It has a government that has trouble collecting its taxes, with a society split between left-wing and right-wing political movements. Aside these issues, the country has indebted itself by borrowing huge amounts of money, and yet the country also has high military expenses. Greece has to reform its government, its country. The bailout package from the International Monetary Fund and the European Union will only further weaken the central government. The country has to realize that it lost its strategic importance to the West, or it has to find a way to become useful again to an external power. It has to lower its standard of living and live within the means. At the same time, it has to attract much more foreign investment. It has to find a way to repair its relations with neighboring countries like Turkey, Bulgaria, Albania, and even Macedonia. And yet, Greece has to maintain control over the Aegean Sea and the islands of Crete, Rhodes, and Corfu. If Greece wants to stand a chance of becoming a modern, stable country, it has to overcome all of these dynamics. And for now, that seems unlikely to happen. This was a Caspian Report by me, Shirvan. Take care. Sağ ol.